Welcome. So today we're going to do Daniel chapter 5, and yeah, if I get a second wind, we could do chapter 6 also. So we'll try to record that as a separate video. But here in chapter 5, we're going to be discussing the writing on the wall. Okay. So for today's class, there's actually two English books I wanted to read from, in addition to the class curriculum, the blue art scroll. Daniel. Also wanted to do the Judaica Press. Towards the end of this chapter, they're going to have some very important comments and quotation of a medrash in English. So also the Judaica Press, Daniel. Okay, so again, I try to go out of my way to find a English translation of a Talmudic source so that people can research it on their own. It's one thing for a person to make claims. It's another thing for a person to quote a source. It's another thing for a person to quote a source that someone could actually review on their own. So when I can find a source that is not only, you could buy a English translation Gemara, or there's a possibility that someone just happens to have the book in their house. So therefore, if I could quote from a book like this, which maybe some people already have in their house, the Judaica Press, so then I think it's even better than quoting from a Gemara as far as is the ability for people to research on their own. Then they could either go to the Gemara or they could go to the book that I'm quoting. Okay, do we have a volunteer translator? Volunteer translator of the English? I'm a volunteer reader of the Aramaic. So, any volunteer translator of the English?
I'll read for you, Rabbi.
That was Teresa? Okay. All right, here we go. Okay, so just keep in mind, Baal Teshazzar is the name that Nebuchadnezzar gave to Daniel. Belshazzar is the name of the son of Avil Merodach, the third and final emperor of Babylon. Okay, so now let's first look at the introduction to chapter 5, or the commentary to verse 1 in chapter 5 in the Art Scroll Blue edition of Daniel. Okay, so Belshazzar. There's a disagreement about who this Belshazzar was. Rashi, in this chapter, in other words, Rashi in verses 18 and 22, assumes both Belshazzar and Avil Merodach who ran before him were sons of Nebuchadnezzar. Now, when Article says that, they're assuming, Rashi assumes that. So this is a very interesting concept. When we say, Talmudically, when we say someone is a son of someone, it means he's a descendant. Primarily, it usually means literally son, but it doesn't have to be. So we have to verify to make sure, is he an actual son or is he a grandson? This case is in point. So in Rashi in Jeremiah chapter 27 verse 7, it seems to say that Belshazzar, last king of Babylon, was the grandson of Nebuchadnezzar. So if you look in chapter 27 verse 7, it's also cited here in the right hand column on page 52 of the Blue Daniel. All the nations will serve him, Nebuchadnezzar, and his son's son. So we have a prophecy of Jeremiah that his son and his son's son means that Belshazzar was the son of El-Merodach, not the brother of El-Merodach. And Rashi there uh, agrees with that. The commentary here also says that this, Seder Olam Rabbah, the medrash that gives the history all the way from Adam until Talmudic times. So that also lists Belshazzar as the grandson of Nebuchadnezzar, not the son of Nebuchadnezzar. So the Medrash Seder Olam is really incredible because now Talmudically and even in Tanakh, the emphasis is not on trying to write history, but Seder Olam puts a date on every case in the Tanakh and Talmud. You know, everything has a year assigned to it. This is important because according to archaeology and the histories and the annals of different nations, there are conflicts historically about what happened in what age, and there's assumptions about what happened at a certain age. So now let's go to the chart at the end of this book. It's also could be found in other books, but here at the end of the blue Daniel by Art Scroll. So we go to the appendix at the end of the book, page 3, the Babylonian exile, a timeline. Let's check that out. Nebuchadnezzar, Avil-Merodach, Belshazzar, then Darius the Mede. So then that's the beginning of the Persian Median Empire. So there's 3 kings listed, right, in Babylon. But let's go to the next page, appendix page, skip to 5, chronology of the period. Now the timeline of Babylon is also printed in other Art Scroll books, but this one is not. This one's found here, chronology of the period. And so, for example, in the previous page, on page 3, so it says Darius the Mede, Cyrus, Ahasuerus, and Darius the Persian, 4 emperors of the Persian Median Empire. But here it lists 5 emperors of the Persian Median Empire. The Darius, the Mede, Cyrus, Cambyses, Ahasuerus, and Darius the Persian. So even here, just on 2 different charts, we have an extra king mentioned that's not mentioned in the more popular chart, the Babylonian exile timeline. In the chronology of the period timeline, we have the mention the ruler Cambyses. Cambyses followed Cyrus, but he was during the reign of Cyrus. See the 3-year reign of Cyrus. So Cambyses was just an interim ruler who ruled for just months. So that explains why he's not mentioned in the Babylonian exile timeline, the most popular Art Scroll chart on the rulers of Persia, is because he didn't have a full year. So therefore, if you're going by years, you could mention Cyrus and Ahasuerus, and there's no loss of years. So it's complete as far as teaching a simple history. But we see from this that, and again, these dates are following the Medrash Seder alum. So therefore, we see from this that if you actually go to like a history book on Persia or something, on the ancient Persian Empire, so you may find like 7 or more rulers. But the Cambyses situation gives us a hint about the history of this, is that a lot of these rulers may have only ruled for a few days, weeks, or months, and it's recorded differently in the annals of some of these countries. Now, why is it recorded differently? And we see, for example, in Egypt, they went out of their way to not mention the fact that they were humiliated by a group of slaves. They avoid talking about the slaves, other than there was a mention of a slave uprising, but there's no mention of the slaves conquering Egypt in their history hieroglyphics. Anything that was embarrassing to them, they wouldn't record. We didn't have a history ethics like nowadays in many countries. Back then, it was only what was conducive to the honor of the current king or the nation as a whole. So, for example, here is a plausible, this is just a theoretical model about why some nations come up with variant dating in their history that doesn't match the Medrash Seder alum, which again it counts every year. So it's hard for a history book that counts every single year for 5,000 years to be wrong. Okay, so now why is there a divergence? So for example, we see in the case of Cambyses here, he only ruled for a few days, weeks, or months. So now, but how would a nation that deletes mention of embarrassing things and tries to promote their own rulers to be great and glorious? So if there was a history book written in the days of Cambyses, it may have mentioned, for example, let's say, for example, he was in the he was in the palace as a high chamberlain or something for 20 years, and then he ruled for 1 year. So they may record that on their system as he was in the palace for 21 years. You understand? So that implies to somebody trying to translate the ancient Persian or whatever country we're talking about, this is a theoretical model, that it implies that he ruled for 21 years, but he didn't rule for 21 years. Again, when you go outside of something like the Torah system, where by a matter of religion they had to, if they're going to mention history dates like in Seder Olam, they could not lie. It's against the Torah to lie. So therefore, if there's a discrepancy, it's probably in the dates by some of these ancient countries where their history is being rewritten to favor the current king at that era. So therefore, you may find, again, you probably won't find it, but I'm just saying theoretically as a model to explain this. If the history book said Cambyses ruled for 30 years, but that's just an English translation of the ancient Persian. Maybe what it actually said was he was in the palace for 31 years, right? And then so we find out that he was a chamberlain for 30 years, and then he just was interim emperor until Ahasuerus took control. Okay, so this is why we find so many discrepancies throughout history, is that you didn't have modern Western values of not trying to lie when you're telling history, and then you also didn't have a religion dedicated to the truth, capturing history, except we find the major text in Talmudic history is the Midrash Seder Olam. Very, very powerful. very powerful tool. Uh, Again, because we mentioned previously in the Tanakh and the Talmud, it's not written as a history book. It's not so concerned about having a half a year not being mentioned here or there. We're talking about ethical and moral choices and stuff like that. We're not so concerned about the history dating precisely in Tanakh or in the Talmud. But the Medrash Seder Olam is very concerned about the precise dating. So that's why it's an extremely powerful dating system. And I would first question the historical account of a country, a random ancient country, before I would doubt the dating system in the Medrash Seder Olam. So when you see a quote about Medrash Seder Olam, that's extremely powerful to give you an accurate dating system of when things actually occurred in history. Okay. Any questions? All right, so let's go into the text. Chapter 5 of Daniel. Okay, I'll read some of the Aramaic and then Teresa will translate. Belshazzar, Malka Avad Lechem, Rav Ravanohi, Alaf V'Lakavel Alpa Chamra Shase. Belshazzar, Amar Bit Em, Chamra Lahai Saya, Lamane Dava V'Chaspa Di Hanpek, Nebuchadnezzar Avuhi Min Hechla Di Virushalem. Vishton Behon Malka V'Rav Ravanohi, Shegla Seha Ulechena Seha. Okay, if Teresa, you can translate the first two verses of chapter 5 of Daniel.
King Belshazzar made a great feast for 1,000 of his nobles and drank wine before the 1,000 guests. While under the influence of wine, Belshazzar gave an order to bring the golden and silver vessels that Nebuchadnezzar, his grandfather, his in brackets grandfather, had removed from the sanctuary that was in Jerusalem for the king and his nobles, his consorts, and his concubines to drink from them.
Yes, like we discussed in the introduction to the chapter, Arsop says his grandfather. This follows Rashi on Jeremiah 27. But the Rashi in this chapter would just say father. Now, if you look in the Judaica Press, so in the Judaica Press, and by the way, Chabad.org uses the translation of Judaica Press, just for your edification. So there's a free version of Judaica Press translation available online through Chabad.org. Okay, so they over here they say his father, just like Rashi. But when in doubt, I think you have to go with the prophet. So Jeremiah said grandson, so it's grandson. That's the way we're learning. And Rashi over there in Jeremiah agrees. Now, when you're doing a study of the Talmudic discussions, because we're not concerned about uh, precision in dating outside of the Medrash Seder Olam. So therefore, this question is possible to occur because again, we're not saying this historical text and that historical text are disagreeing with each other. We're saying this interpretation and that interpretation are disagreeing with each other. However, we have an explicit verse from the prophet already telling us what it is. Okay, so in Jeremiah chapter 7, verse 7, all the nations will serve him and his son's son until the time of the reckoning of his land comes, as well as many nations and great kings will enslave him. So until the time of the reckoning will come, that's occurring in this chapter. So there's no time after Belshazzar for there to be another king. And Jeremiah is a proven prophet. So Jeremiah is an example of a source we cannot doubt. The question is now, why would Rashi explain it in our chapter as son instead of grandson? If there's a prophet who gave a clear translation. So let's look at Rashi on Jeremiah chapter 7, verse 7. Okay, so if you look in the Hebrew, I could translate it for you, but okay, so if you look in the Hebrew and Rashi on Jeremiah 27, verse 7, Ves beno avil merodach, Ves ben beno, the son of his son, Baal Shatzar. So Rashi says it here, clearly here. So here, Rashi says, Ben Beno, the son of his son, is Belshazzar. That's Jeremiah 27. Now let's look at the Rashi here on this chapter. And again, Rashi in this chapter says it twice. That's the complication, right? Verses 18 and 22. No. So article is not saying it's Rashi in 1822. They're saying the verse 18. Okay, maybe Rashi's on 22. No, it's not. Interesting. Very interesting. Okay, so I was assuming this is my mistake, but I think it's a mistake that people can make from this art scroll. So the art scroll here says Rashi, probably relying on verses 18-22, assumes both Belshazzar and Avil Merodach reigned before him were sons of Nebuchadnezzar. Okay, but it doesn't say on which verse. Okay, so but if you look at Rashi, Rashi is really discussing this not on 18 and 22, but Rashi is really discussing this on verse 1. Okay, so Belshazzar Malka, but no Haya, his son he was. Umelech acher lachar Evil Merodach, shemalach tachas Nebuchadnezzar. Gam hu Haya beno shel Nebuchadnezzar. So Rashi says explicitly he was a son of Nebuchadnezzar. Okay, so here we have it. So Rashi explicitly, in clear language, saying he was a son of Nebuchadnezzar. But what does son mean? Son, again, it was as I mentioned previously, son means descendant. For example, there is a medrash that says Eliezer hu Canaan. So Canaan, the grandson of Noah, the medrash says he was Eliezer, the servant of Abraham. But it's a disagreement among the commentaries on the medrash. Was he literally Canaan, who Canaan, who lived 800 years, and then in his old age became a servant to Abraham because he had such vigor, or was he a descendant of the Canaanites, and he became a servant to Abraham and a very righteous person? So, so we see in the case of Eliezer, the Medrash, when it says Eliezer, he is Canaan, it doesn't lock it down. It's meaning literally he is the same person with a different name. It means he's either him or his descendant. But there's something further. When you find the phrase in the Medrash that this person, he is this person, like for example, uh, Pin, Elijah, he was Pinchas. Well, according to, for example, in Tanit Ve'elio, which was a medrash from Elijah himself, Elijah is not Pinchas. So when it says Elijah was Pinchas, there are those who hold, again, this is not written down by Elijah; it's written down in the name of Elijah. So therefore, it's a competing opinion. This, according to this opinion, Elijah was not Pinchas. According to the Medrash, it says he was Pinchas. So at the very least, when it's saying Elijah, he was Pinchas, it's saying that Elijah has the spiritual makeup of Pinchas, of Phineas. Same type of person, passionate to do God's will, willing to risk his life for the greater good. Phineas went into the heart of the tribe of Zimri and slew their prince alone without any bodyguards. It was a reasonable chance that he was not going to survive this effort. Similarly, Elijah went to the Mount Carmel, surrounded by the army of the idol worshipping Achav, Ahab, and 250 priests of Baal, each armed with a dagger. And Talmudic law, we don't rely on a miracle to survive, normally speaking. So Elijah and Phineas had the exact same spiritual makeup, whether or not they're the exact same person. In Kabbalistic discussion, it's also a question: is the soul of Phineas went into the body of Elijah? That's another angle on that. But the important thing is this: that we understand when in this area, when the Talmud or the is discussing a person of one era is the other person, it doesn't necessarily mean he had to live 1,000 years and become that person. He changed his name, stuff like that. It could just be talking about the spiritual makeup of this person is in this person. Similarly, we find here a perfect example when it says that in the discussion by Rashi here and in Jeremiah 27, that Belshazzar was the son of Nebuchadnezzar. So over there in Jeremiah, it says the grandson. Again, the Medrash Seder Olam, the one area in the Talmud which is ironclad about the dating system, that also agrees with the Jeremiah Rashi, and the Jeremiah's prophecy itself agrees with the Jeremiah Rashi. So the fact that Rashi goes out of his way here, so now in my mind, it's not a debate. The clear pshat, the clear understanding, is that Belshazzar was the grandson of Nebuchadnezzar, not the brother of Evil-Merodach. But the way that Rashi goes explicitly here on the commentary of verse 1 in chapter 5 of Daniel, that it says he was also a son of Nebuchadnezzar. So he uses like a double terminology that he was a son of Nebuchadnezzar. But again, when we're using the term son, the goal is not genealogy. The goal is not history. The goal is to discuss the spiritual makeup of this person, that person. Now, here's the question. Why would Daniel use the verse in Daniel here? It says son. It doesn't say grandson. Why would the verse in Daniel say it differently from the verse in Jeremiah? Okay, so that's the real question, because if you consider this, just take a step back. Rashi and Jeremiah is not doubting the prophecy that he is commenting on. He is believing Jeremiah 100%. Rashi and Daniel is not doubting the prophecy. He's believing Daniel 100%. So Rashi is not inconsistent. He is being ethically consistent by being faithful to the prophecy he is reviewing. The question is, why does Daniel disagree with Jeremiah? So the language of the verse in Jeremiah is explicit, and the fact that we have the Medrash Seder Olam, the Medrash of solid dates, agreeing with it means it's hard to disagree with the interpretation of Jeremiah. So why is Daniel being unliteral when he's discussing Belshazzar here? Furthermore, we went from the reign of Nebuchadnezzar in the last verse of chapter 4 to the reign of Belshazzar without mentioning Evil Merodach. You want to learn about Evil Merodach, you have to go to the book of Jeremiah. Right. So, or to go to Ezekiel, other books. You can't just it's not here. There's no verse. There's no chapter 4.5 here in Daniel discussing Evil Merodach. So remember, Evil Merodach was the king who released Yehonia, the Yoyakin, from prison in Babylon, and he became the grandfather of Zerubbabel, who was the first governor of Israel in the time of Ezra, and forefather of Mashiach. So Evil Merodach is a huge place in Jewish history. But here we're skipping from Nebuchadnezzar to Belshazzar. But there's a medrash that says the reason for this is that it's brought down here in the Eretz Scroll in the commentary to verse 1. So in the bottom of page 52 on the right-hand side, Nebuchadnezzar and Belshazzar were both wicked, but Evil Merodach nullified some of his father's evil decrees. Rav Huna Baruch said these events are not listed in direct chronological sequence, so that they should not say its narrative is poetry. So that we should all know that he, the author of the book, wrote it under influence of the Holy Spirit. Scripture is not a chronological record of events. All of it, even the parts dealing on their surface with historical events, a revelation from God to man carrying his message, whether in their pashat, apparent meaning, in their remez, implications, or in allusions so hidden as to be esoteric, sod. Chronology is adhered to only where it does not interfere with the transmission of the underlying message. This is the principle behind the well-known dictum in mukdam u'ma'uchar b'Torah. The Torah does not necessarily follow chronological sequence. Now we're on the top of page 53 in the commentary. It's Gemara on Pesachim 6b and Rashi to Numbers 9, chapter 9, verse 1. Okay. So we see here Nebuchadnezzar and Belshazzar are put together to teach an evil king will have evil consequences. In other words, the Medrash Bereshis Rabbah, and this is on the second from the last paragraph on page 2 in the commentary. Medrash Bereshis Rabbah asks, and where is Evil Merodach, and why is no mention of him here? Did nothing noteworthy to the Jews take place during his 23 years of his reign? Rabbi Elazar said, this is in order to place the matters of an evildoer next to the matters of another evildoer. Okay. I'm glad the Eretz Scroll quoted these Midrash. Okay, so we see here the purpose of this chapter in juxtaposition to chapter 4 is to teach the downfall of the wicked. So we have to not get sidetracked by even mentioning Evel Merodach here in this concept. Since we're not mentioning Evel Merodach, okay, so now we sort of, for the narrative of these two chapters, chapter 4 and 5 of Daniel, our narrative is to decry against evil kings, right? Okay. So now, if you're saying in a Talmudic fashion, right? So in other words, this is what we're having. This is the process we're going. Jeremiah is writing in a literal historical account. Remember, Jeremiah wrote the Book of Kings, which is more historical than most books in the Tanakh. So Jeremiah wrote literally that Ben Beno, the grandson, Belshazzar is the grandson. Here, our goal is not to. We don't so much care about chronology. We don't care about history for the moment. We don't care about uh, genealogy so much, except for the fact that why does chapter 5 follow chapter 4? It's like saying Elijah is Phineas, even if it's not or Eliezer is Canaan. It's true. Maybe Elijah is Phineas. Maybe Eliezer is Canaan. But for our discussion, we are not so concerned about that. We want to know, why is Belshazzar doing this when he's the son of Evel Merodach? No, spiritually speaking, Belshazzar was not the son of Evel Merodach. He was the son of Nebuchadnezzar, the man who would eat cute bunny rabbits alive. So that's what we're saying here. This is what Daniel means when he says that Belshazzar is the son of Nebuchadnezzar. He's the spiritual son of Nebuchadnezzar. Don't even mention Evel Merodach. You'll get sidetracked perhaps. You won't realize what's going on here. So Belshazzar was trying to relive all the evil of his grandfather, and he remembered none of the good of his father, as if he didn't exist. So therefore, the mention of Evel Merodach doesn't exist between mention of the downfall of Nebuchadnezzar and then the downfall of Belshazzar. Okay, so I mean, considering the language of Daniel and Rashi, and the language of Jeremiah and Rashi, I think this was a huge conflict we had to address. So as far as Peshat goes, we go according to Jeremiah. But as far as message goes, so Jeremiah is like speaking classical historical style. Daniel is speaking classical midrashic style. It doesn't really matter about the dates and the times and the chronology and the genealogy. What we're trying to find out is, how does evil beget evil? When a later generation of evil tries to relive a previous generation of evil. So therefore, as far as evil goes, yes, Belshazzar was the son of Nebuchadnezzar. But from a actual genealogical perspective, no, he was a grandson, just like Jeremiah said. Any questions?
I have one, Rabbi. If that's the
Yes.
case, will we see a tikkun being done in this study of Daniel with Nebuchadnezzar and with Daniel, or Belshazzar's I can't say the name. Daniel's name.
Daniel's
Belteshazzar?
Belteshazzar, and
Right.
the evil king is Belshazzar without the
Right.
te.
Oh, okay. So will we see a tikkun by Belshazzar then?
Well, tikkun as in he will have a kapara, a atonement, a severe consequence.
Oh, okay, okay.
Tikkun could be a fixing that doesn't result in a tragedy. Atonement results in something that could be some sort of sacrifice. Like if a person didn't die, maybe an animal did die, and it's a sacrifice.
Oh,
That's atonement.
okay.
But now it's interesting in the prayers for Yom Kippur. In one of the prayers, we pray that God atones for us. In other words, accepts our repentance so much as if we gave atonement.
As
You
if
know,
we gave our own sacrifice and
right? Because some sins people do, they're not aware of.
mhm.
So if people did severe sin and they're not aware of it, so then they could have a severe atonement.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Rabbi.
Good question. Okay, so when we close out chapter 5, again the commentary in the Judaica press is very good. It does two things. They translate a medrash. They also quote Rav Sadia Gaon, which the article doesn't quote, as far as I know. And when I was learning the verses before I read any commentaries, it occurred to me the way Rav Sadia Gaon was learning. So I think it's a more natural interpretation. But okay, we'll get to that towards the end of the chapter. Okay, so now we read the first two verses. So that's pretty good. We got about 45 minutes on two verses, but the rest of the chapter is probably going to go a lot quicker. Don't worry. But I had highfalutin ideas about reading two chapters today, hopefully. But apparently, we had to discuss this. It's very important. It's primal in the way that we interpret Tanakh. To be able to trust every single word and to be able to explain every single discrepancy between this prophet or that prophet. Whereas it's not possible of course, in other religions. There's some religions with texts contradicts each other, and there's no solution. But here we're talking about the actual word of God. So therefore, even if there's a contradiction, there is a solution. Okay, verse 3 in the Aramaic, and continuing after that. Verse 3 in the Aramaic, Daniel chapter 5. Beidayin haisiv mane dahava di hanpiku min hechla di ves elaha di vishalem vishtiv bahon malka rabanohi shegla seha olachen naseha ishtiv chamra v'shabachu lelahe dava v'chaspa nechasha parzala of avna ba'ashasa nefaka etzba'an di yad anash v'chasvan lakabel nev rashta algira di chasal hechla di malka umalka chaze fas yada di chasva Adain Malka Zivohi Shinohi Rayonohi Yavahalu Neha Vikitre Kartseha Mishtaraya Mishrayan Var Kubaseha Da Lada Naksham. Okay, if you could translate the verses 3 through 6.
So
Tracy.
they brought the golden vessel, and that they had removed from the sanctuary of the temple of God in Jerusalem. And the king, his nobles, his consorts, his concubines drank from them. They drank wine and praises the gods and praised the gods of gold and silver, copper, iron, wood, and stone. Just then, fingers of a human hand came forth and wrote on the plaster of the wall of the king's palace facing the candelabrum. And the king saw the palm of the hand that was writing. The king's appearance thereupon changed, and his thoughts bewildered him. The belt around his waist opened, and his knees buckled one against the other.
Okay, so the it's interesting. Our scroll commentary here matches the Judaica Press translation better than the Art Scroll translation. So in Judaica Press translation of verse 6, the belt around his waist open is translated the belt around his loins untied. So if it was a loincloth, so then the because of his extreme fright, the king's loins constricted, causing the belt to open in Art Scroll, fits that translation. But Art Scroll actually translates it the belt around his waist. Now, if it's his waist, it's a bit higher than the loins. So the waist is connected, of course, to the stomach and the lungs. So if someone gasps for breath, right, and their belt was very loose fitting, they didn't tighten it, right? They were having a feast, so it was the practice mentioned in the Talmud to open the belt during a Seuda, a big feast. So therefore, they could keep eating and not have the belt suddenly start to restrict their tummy. So in that context, the translation Art Scroll is better. It was his waist, so therefore he it's natural for the belt to be unbuckled in those days during the meal, and therefore he gasps at the seeing a ghost, and that was causes diaphragm to move and the stomach to move, and the loose belt to already drop. That makes perfect sense. But if you say his loins, so then it's more complicated because then you're saying, how did his belt get untied? So in other words, okay, if it's literal, so it would make sense that what occurred was that he loosened his clothing for the big feast, and it dropped because it was loose. If it was an allegory referring to um his loins shrinking in terror, so then why did suddenly his cloth become loose? The cloth is supposed to move with the body. If it is a matter of a euphemism for he lost control of his bladder. I mean that that was actually when I was reading it before I read the commentaries. I assumed it was a euphemism for he lost his control of his bladder because you hear so many stories of people being terrified and losing control of their bladder, but uh, that's not the way the commentaries interpreted. It was either a loosening of the waist, uh, the, a band around the waist, or a band around the the loin area. Okay, so but neither of this is essential. It's good to know when there's in exegesis. I'm trying to just deliver the full story to you, and but obviously the discrepancy we had between uh, Daniel and Jeremiah and Rashi was obviously the bigger question we had to address. But in either case, so a terrifying thing occurred, and it affected Belshazzar severely. It only mentioned that the king's appearance changed. It doesn't mention that everyone else was terrified too. It doesn't say a hush filled the room or screams of terror filled the chamber. It doesn't say that. It talks about Belshazzar being extra specifically extra terrified.
But Rabbi,
Okay.
did everyone see the writing or just the hand?
Well, it says that the king saw the hand, saw the palm of the hand that was writing.
Okay.
So apparently from the entire hand area, like that. But it says it uses the language of the fingers of a human hand came forth. So in other words, it was a human-sized hand. It wasn't a giant hand. Human-sized hand. Okay, so now the king's reaction will continue to seem to grow more and more disturbed. You translated through verse 6, correct?
Let's see. Yes.
Okay. Verse 7 in the Aramaic. Kare Malka B'chayel Allah Ashfaya Kastae V'Gazraya Ane Malka V'Amar L'Chakime V'Veldi Chol Anash Di Ikre Kasava Dina Ufishre Yachavinani Argavana Yulbash V'Hamanicha Di Dahava Al-Tzavreha V'Salte Malchusa Yishlat. Okay, please translate verse 7.
The king cried aloud to bring in the astrologers, the Chaldeans, the stargazers, and the demonists. The king explained to the sages of Babylon that any person who would read this writing and tell its interpretation would wear royal purple with a chain of gold on his neck and would rule 1/3 of the kingdom.
He was willing to give up 1/3 of his kingdom. He was so terrified. But again, he continues in his extreme reaction. Verses 8 and 9. Adain alin kolcha kime malka v'lo chahalin kesava lemikre ufishrea lahoda malka. Adain malka bel shatzar sagi misbahal uzivohi shanayin alohi v'ravrava nohi mish tabshin. Okay, please translate verses 8 and 9.
Then all the king's sages came in, but they could not read the writing and make the interpretation known to the king. Then King Belshazzar was greatly bewildered, and his appearance changed upon him, and his nobles were confounded.
So now it's interesting when it says his nobles were confounded. It doesn't. The commentaries that I saw didn't really comment on that. But the question is, what were they confounded because of the message of the writing on the wall, the miracle of the writing on the wall, or were they confounded because of Belshazzar's overreaction? I mean, it's if he's afraid of a ghost, just move his chamber to a different building or something. But why suddenly give up a third of his power and continue to see more and more, and until his physical appearance changed from his haunted expression. So what you see what I'm saying? So what's the consternation? The miracle, the message that nobody could translate, or the fact that Belshazzar was like becoming completely haggard in the course of a few hours. Verse 10 in the original prophecy, Malkasa Lekabel Mile, Malka Rav Ravanohi, Leves Mishtia Alas Anas, Malkasa Lameres, Malka Lalamin, Kayi Al Yevahaluch, Rayonach, Zivach, Al Ish Tano. Isai Gvar Malchusach, Dibrach Alachin Kadishin Be, Uviyome Avuch Nahiru Lasach Lasanu, Vachachmas Elahim Hisht Techachas Be, Umaka Nebuchadnezzar Avuch Rav Hartumin Ashfin Kasdain Gazrin Kirmeha Avuch Malka. Kol Kavel Di Ruach Yatira Uman Da Vasach Sachlas Sanu Mafashar Chalmin Vachavayas Achidan Meshare Kitrin Hish Techachas Be Bedaniel Di Malka Sam Shemea Bel Teshatzar Ka'an Daniel Yiskare Ufishra Yahave. Okay, please translate verses 10 through 12. Teresa.
As the consequence of the words of the king and his nobles, the queen came into the banquet hall. The queen explained and said, "May the king live forever. Do not be bewildered, nor let your appearance be changed. There is a man in your kingdom in whom is the spirit of the holy God, and in your grandfather's days, brilliance, understanding, and wisdom, like the wisdom of God," with a capital G, were found in him. And King Nebuchadnezzar, your grandfather, made him chief of the necromancers, astrologers, Chaldeans, stargazers, and demonists. Since extraordinary spirit, intelligence, understanding, interpreting of dreams, solving of riddles, and resolving of difficulties have been found in Daniel, whom the king named Belshazzar, let Daniel now be called, and he will relate the interpretation.
So it's very fascinating that the queen knew more than the wise men.
Mm-hmm.
So there's not a lot of discussion about the queen. Now the queens of Persia are different because they're actually descended from the Medes. The according to a Medrash, Darius the Mede's son-in-law was Cyrus the Great. So the Median Empire, the Persians married into the Median Empire, and that's how they became the next rulers. Fascinating. So that means the Persian kings were all descended from the Medians on the mother side. But apparently the queen, the queen of Belshazzar was a greater person than Belshazzar. We don't know much about her, but very interesting. Okay, continuing verse 13. Bedain Daniel hu al kadam malka ane malka valmar la Daniel ant hud Daniel di min bene velusa di Yehud di haisi malka avi min Yehud v'shim es alach di ruach elahim bach v'nahari v'nahiru v'sachlasanu v'chachamaya tira hishtachas bach v'cha'an hu alu kadamai chakimaya ashpaya di chesava dina yikron ufishre lahoda usani v'la chahanlin Bashar Milsa Lachavaya Vanashim Ace Alach Di Sikul Kishrin Lemifshar Vikitrin Lemishre Kaan Hen Tikul Kasava Lemikre Ufishrea Lahoda Sani Argavana Silvash Hamachina Vamanicha Di Dahava al Tsavrach V'Salta V'Malchusa Tishlat. Okay, please translate verses 13 through 16.
Then Daniel was brought before the king. The king spoke up and said to Daniel, "You are Daniel, from among the people of the exile of Judah, whom the king my grandfather brought from Judah. I have heard about you that the Spirit of God is in you, and that brilliance, understanding, and extraordinary wisdom are found in you. The sages, the astrologers, were now brought before me to read this writing and make its interpretation known to me, but they could not tell the interpretation of the matter. But I have heard about you that you are able to provide interpretations and to resolve difficulties. Now, if you will be able to read the writing and make its interpretation known to me, you will wear royal purple with the chain of gold on your neck, and you will rule 1/3 of the kingdom."
Interesting to note the Aramaic word for Judah, Yehud, is the name of the town where Judah, the son of Jacob, is buried. Yehud. So we see there it's the Aramaic origin of the name of the town in modern days. Modern days meaning the past couple thousand years. Judah, son of Jacob, was buried, of course, over 3,000 years. Continuing the prophecy in verse 17, Beidayan, Ane Daniel v'amar kadam malka matnasach lach lehev yan unevaz b'yasach la'acharan havbaram kasava ekre lemalka ufishra ahod ine ant malka elaha ila'a malchusa revusa vikara v'hadra Yahav Nebuchadnezzar Avuch Min Revusa Did Yahav Le Kol Amaya Umaya Shanaya Havo Zoin Dachalin Min Kadamohi Di Hava Tzave Hava Katel V'Di Hava Tzave Hava Meched V'Di Hava Tzave Hava Marim Di Hava Tzave Hava Mashpil Chadi Rim Liv Veveha Verucheha Tikfas Lahazada Hanchas Min Karse Malchuse Vikara Hadiv Mineho. Umin b'nei anasha tarid v'liv v'veha im chev sa shaviv v'im aradaya madoreha ispa chesorin yeta'amuneha umital shemaya gishmeha yitztaba adi yada di shalit elaha ila'a b'malchus anasha ulaman di yitzpe yakem Allah. It's cool saying Aramaic. It makes me feel like I'm reading a hieroglyphic. It's it's a whole different sound to it. Okay, so please translate verses 17 through 21.
Daniel did reply.
Yeah, you're
No,
sorry.
excuse me.
Hold
Daniel
on.
then replied and said before the king, "Let your gifts remain yours and give your rewards to others, but I will read the writing for the king and make its interpretation known to him. You, O king, the supreme God, gave kingship, greatness, honor, and majesty to Nebuchadnezzar, your grandfather. And because of the greatness that he gave him, all the peoples, nations, and languages used to tremble and be frightened before him. Whomever he wished he would kill, and whomever he wished he would keep alive, whomever he wished he would raise up, and whomever he wished he would put down. But when his heart grew proud and his spirit was hardened in rebel, he was disposed from his royal throne, and honor was taken from him. He was driven from mankind, and his heart was made like a beast. His dwelling was with wild asses, and they fed him grass like oxen, and his body was washed with the dew of heaven, until he recognized that the supreme God rules over the kingdom of men, and that whomever he wishes, he appoints over it."
Now, so now it becomes even more dramatic as Daniel turns it from a historical account to a direct admonition. V'ant barei Belshazzar lo hashpelt livavach kol kavel v'chol dana yadata. Valmare Shemaya hisro mamta ulamanaya di vaiseha haisiv kadamach vant ravanach sheglasa l'chenasach kamra shasayin bahon lahe haspa v'dava chasha farzala ha'av avna di la chazayin la shamin la yadin shabachta v'leilaha di shamach ideha or chasach lea lo hadarta. Okay, please translate through verse 23,
But
22 and 23.
you, his grandson Belshazzar, did not humble your heart, although you knew all this. You exalted yourselves against the Lord of heaven, and the vessels of his house were brought before you, and you, your nobles, your consorts, your concubines drank wine from them, and you praised the gods of silver and gold, copper, iron, wood, and stone, which do not see, nor hear, nor know, but the God of whose hand is your soul, and to whom all your ways belong, you did not glorify. Thus the palm of a hand was,
Well, I didn't translate that. I
sorry.
didn't. No, sorry. So, the sin in Hebrew would be called me'ilah, a misappropriation of spiritually high and sacred objects. for even a mundane purpose, for a mundane feast, just for someone's birthday party, is a severe sin. But to use the supreme God's uh, uh, utensils of holiness to honor the supreme God, to use that to honor fake gods, is beyond obscene. Continuing the prophecy, Bedain min kadamohi shaliach pasa di yada sava dana rashim udana chasava di rashim mene tekel ufarsin. Okay, please translate verses 24, 25.
Thus the palm of a hand was sent from before him, and it inscribed the writing. This is the writing that was inscribed. Mi'im tekel ush hatsin.
Mene tekel ufarsin. It's easier to read it in the Aramaic. Okay, so continuing in the original prophecy, Dana Fashar Milsa Menemna Elahad Malchusach Vashalom Mah Tekel Tekilta Vmoznaya Hish Chachat Chasir Perisas Malchusach Vihivas Lamadai Ofaras. Okay, please translate verses 26, 27, and 28.
This is the interpretation of the matter. Mene counted. God has counted the years of your kingship and terminated it. Tekel weighted. You have been weighted in the scales and found wanting. Perez, broken up. Your kingdom has been broken and given to Media and Persia.
Continuing in the last two verses of the chapter, Bedain Amar Belshazzar V'halbishu Daniel Argavana V'amnicha di Dahava al Salvareha V'achrizu Alohi di Leheve Shalit Talta V'malchusa Be Bel Belelia Katil Belshazzar Malka Hasta. Okay, please translate the last two verses of the chapter.
Then Belshazzar gave the command, and they clothed Daniel in royal purple with the chain of gold on his neck, and they proclaimed about him that he would rule 1/3 of the kingdom. That very night, Belshazzar, the Chaldean king, was slain.
So I'm going to go over to the Judaica Press translation, the commentary in Judaica Press. So first, so in verse 29 it says that they put on the promised purple and gold that Belshazzar promised whoever would translate it when he promised in his terror. So in the severity of his terror, he sincerely was planning to give up a third of his kingdom. But why did he do that? Well, what was happening before was that people were clueless, and he had experience. If you yell at people to figure it out, they may not suddenly become wise. So he figured that somebody must know how to do this to interpret it, but they figure what's it to them? What's the point of going out of their way for the sake of Belshazzar? So he figured he has to appeal to people's avarice, personal desire for gain. He had to come up with a bribe. So when I read this for the first time, I was assuming something like this was behind the motivation. And Rav Sadia Gaon, who lived hundreds of years before Rashi, he and just a couple hundred years after the close of the Talmud, so he came up with a commentary similar to this. So it's translated into English, a portion of his commentary. Now, Rav Sadia Gaon on Daniel is actually very prolific. If you look at the art scroll, the big commentary in the Hebrew, that's Rav Sadia Gaon. So he wrote a lot on Daniel. But we actually have a portion of it translated here in the Judaica press. So on verse 29, when Belshazzar heard of his impending doom, he attempted to flatter Daniel. So perhaps he would pray for him and nullify the decree. But Daniel told him he had erred in his calculations, as we'll explain below. So he was not just trying to get an interpretation. Again, he was taking it worse than most of the people in the room, apparently, from the way the narrative is. So, assuming that's the case, the implication of the pasuk is literal. Again, because we saw previously, not everything in this chapter is literal. But assuming that's literal, that he was panicking much more than everyone else. I mean, we see that his wife was much more calm than he was. So he was in terror, and he didn't feel that anyone was really motivated to help him. So he had to flatter and bribe. That's the way it was. The options that were left him, and it's so the Sadia Gaon mentioned the chanifus, the flattery. That so it's a very interesting and fascinating. Also because Rabbi Sadia Gaon is a more ancient commentary than Rashi, so it's very fascinating this perspective. I felt. Okay, so now the on the closing verse, there is a good an important medrash that's quoted here in the Judaica press. Let me read the entire English commentary on verse 30 here in Judaica press. On that very night, Belshazzar, the Chaldean king, was assassinated. According to Josephon, book 1, chapter 3, when Daniel interpreted the writing on the wall, all Belshazzar's courtiers became frightened and fled, leaving him with his eunuchs and the members of his household. So Josephon, which is either written by or based on the writings of Josephus. It depends. The Josephon, it's a debate. Was it written like 1,000 years ago, or was it written with the rest of the writings of Josephus a couple thousand years ago? Okay. So all Belshazzar's courtiers became frightened and fled. That's Josephus says that. Leave him alone with his eunuchs and the members of his household. Nevertheless, but that's the solution I suggested. If you're terrified of a ghost, just leave. Why give up a third of your kingdom? You understand? So he was taking this. Belshazzar was taking this as a personal threat, and it was appropriate he did. One of the eunuchs pondered over the entire episode and, convinced from past experience that Daniel's predictions always came true, decided that this one would too. Therefore, when Belshazzar retired for the night, he decapitated him and carried his head to the Persian camp in order to find favor in the eyes of the attacking armies. So this is Josephon's interpretation how Belshazzar died that night. He was assassinated by one of his eunuchs, who was trying to find favor with the attacking army that was at the gate of the Medians. But according to Song of Song Rabbah, the Medrash Rabbah on Song of Songs, this is fascinating because it connects Darius the Mede, Cyrus the Great, and Belshazzar all in the same palace, and the the Daniel here ends with that Belshazzar was assassinated. It doesn't say there was a war between the Medes and the Persians, the Persians, Medes, and the Babylonians. Now, of course, there was a previous prophecy that there would be a war, there would be a reckoning for the evil people in Babylon. Nevertheless, the emphasis here is that if only the king was assassinated by members of his own cabinet or something, it could have been a relatively peaceful conquest of Nineveh, of the palace, and whereas the war took place in throughout other lands, those who were loyalists to the Babylonians had to do battle with the Median Persians. Yeah, but so here it is, a very interesting alternative idea. Recorded in the Medrash Rabbah. Again, the fact that a Medrash which doesn't concern itself so much with history would record this has some sort of significance spiritually. So here we go. According to Song Rabbah, this is in chapter 3, paragraph 3. When Belshazzar heard Daniel's interpretation of the writing, he issued a decree that whoever would appear and seek entry into the palace, even if he should say, "I am the king," should be decapitated. Belshazzar was stricken with stomach cramps, and he had to use the privy, which was outside the palace. He left the palace unnoticed, but upon his return, he was noticed by Cyrus and Darius, his sentries. When they demanded that he identify himself, he said, "I am the king." According to his own orders, they crushed his skull with the flower of the menorah with a candelabra, and he died. So Darius and Cyrus and Darius were sentries of Belshazzar, according to this medrash. And we learn elsewhere that another medrash that Cyrus was the son-in-law of Darius. So in these two centuries, you had who would become the representatives of the first leaders of Media and Persia, which is fascinating. Now, another layer to this, that why it's such a interesting idea, that if indeed they began their rule of the Median Persian Empire from the palace of Belshazzar. The reason why this is so interesting to me is that uh, is that um, is that Cyrus and Darius were, oh my gosh. All right, so sorry, there was something that just happened in the house. I got distracted, but it's all right. Okay, so Baruch Hashem, let me interrupt to take questions. There was another commentary I wanted to quote before we conclude. Please go ahead. Any questions?
I just think it was interesting that commentary is not here in the art scroll about him being beheaded by, anyway.
Yes, now that commentary is based on Josephon, which is a external book. It's not part of the Talmudic system. It's not a Talmudic literature.
Okay.
But Josephon is quoted by Rashi.
Everybody.
So since Josephon is quoted by Rashi, so therefore you have the authority of Rashi that this part has meaning.
If I may ask,
Okay, you have a question?
am I right on time for learning?
You're always right on time for learning. Just
But
this.
am I a little late?
Well, we just finished chapter 5 of Daniel,
Oh,
but you're just in time for the next chapter that you start on your own. It's so perfect timing.
so what's the next chapter?
So we just finished the chapter of the writing on the wall, chapter 5. The next chapter, which we're going to do next time, is chapter 6, the lion's den.
Rabbi,
Yes.
I have a question. It's
Okay.
interesting to me in the beginning of this chapter where the king sees the palm of the hand and
In other words, it was facing him like this. It wasn't facing him like that.
correct. So it almost is as if he saw the power of God, the strength of God. And it's like he still toyed with that. He didn't take it serious enough. The only thing he did was send for people to try to interpret the meaning.
Right. And when Daniel gave him the interpretation and he knew it was the interpretation, he didn't say, "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to offend the supreme God."
Mm.
You know, he
Yeah,
was just
yeah.
he was looking for the next the next pastry or something.
So,
Didn't take him serious, that's for sure.
right,
I want to listen to Daniel while I'm eating that Danish. Could you pass it? Yeah, we're bringing the Danish. You know.
right. And but then when Daniel gave the interpretation,
Mhm.
is it a past tense interpretation?
Well, uh, it's interesting. Also, Daniel's, according to the Art Scroll translation, it's a little more confusing in a sense because when Daniel's speaking to him, he said in verse 22, "But you, his parentheses grandson," right?
Right.
So, but if you look in the Judaica press, 22, "But you, his son," which is the literal verse in Daniel, "You, his son." It's written, "You, his son." However, now, so I have a theory why arts will use "you, his grandson." So now, again, with the prophecies in the prophets, it's different style from the prophecies of the writings. Prophecies from the prophets, it's the prophecy occurs and it's written down later. Prophecies from the writings, it's first prophesied, written down, and then it's read as a prophecy. Like when the Book of Lamentations was read to Jehoiakim, the king. First Jeremiah wrote it down and then he delivered the prophecy. Whereas the
Wow.
other prophecies of Jeremiah, he spoke it and then it was later written down months or years later.
Wow. Okay.
So
Okay.
when this was written, right? So it's fascinating. When this was written down, he was being called the son of Nebuchadnezzar
You
in the
probably
prophecy,
had
because
many people
spiritually that's what he was. He was
coming.
just the son of Nebuchadnezzar. It's as if he followed none of the good of his father Avil Merodach. But
Mm,
when he was speaking to him, the question is, did he add the phrase grandfather, or did he read it literally as a uh, my assumption though is that he probably read it the way Judaica Press translates. He read it as son, as to be a harder hitting prophecy of admonition. You're only the son of Nebuchadnezzar. It's like you were never born from Evil Merodach who did good.
right. It's and it now that you say that, it's starting to make a little bit more sense now as to why it seems like it's past tense, as if Daniel already saw it coming with his grandfather for his grandson. Very interesting. Wow.
Right. Now the interesting, this is also interesting, since the prophecies in the writings were written before they were spoken, and Daniel read the wall and gave the interpretation in real time. That means he wrote the prophecy of this chapter before he was summoned.
That's fascinating.
So even the writing on the wall, he wrote down before it was written down on the wall.
Yeah. Wow. Mm.
Before you ever saw it. Wow.
Yes. Complete
That's amazing.
mastery of the prophecy.
Mhm.
Yeah. Wow.
Di-
That's
different
amazing.
level.
Yeah. Mm. Wow. Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. So so the thing, and I now remember the thing I like about the Medrash from Song of Songs mentioned in Judaica Press on the last verse of the chapter, Daniel 5, is that it's natural. It's that the nations of Media and Persia, why would they unite and suddenly behind people, at least according to this interpretation, who were just sentries in the enemy army? It's because they assassinated the enemy. They brought down they brought the end to the reign of Babylon. Therefore, who better but to honor with a rule than the father and son-in-law who did that? So since he was older, so the first rule went to Darius, and then since he was younger, the rule transferred over to Cyrus, and his descendants continued the process until the end of the Persian Empire. So it just from a political psychological perspective, it seems like a natural transition from this kingdom to that kingdom, right? So now, again, it's a medrash. It's not Seder Olam, which again is the literal medrash of history. So therefore, it could be an allegory. This is the spiritual makeup that could have happened, and it's represented by this or that. But it's interesting how it fits in even with the political philosophy of the way the masses react. These two people, if the sentries, Darius and Cyrus, would be considered great heroes without firing a single arrow, they defeated the enemy.
I had a question.
And the rest of the war would just be cleaning up against the pockets of resistance of loyalists. So I mean, it just that would the way God controls history, it just fits in so perfectly. So again, when you're doing research of ancient history, it's really hard to do it because you often have to rely on sources that are non-historic or are on purpose perverted to make the current king look better, as we said at the start of this video. As you know, I used to teach history and political science at Torah College, so it's just something that's interested me, and I thought perhaps you'd find it interesting as well.
Yes.
Okay,
thank you,
question on the floor.
So, when you're doing a history of a barbaric, guilty, wicked line of 70 corrupted demonic, very Rashai Yemish, 70 ancient nations, 70
Well, we're just talking about Babylon right now.
70 ancient populations of nations, ancient corrupt nations, wicked kings, judges, troops, soldiers, people, and viceroys,
Okay.
and all that,
So
and wicked false gods.
okay, so what's the question?
It's something else. But my real question was,
Okay, yes, the real question. Thank you.
who was the ones who killed the Chaldean king Belshazzar, that very night, Belshazzar, the third and last wicked Babylonian king, and very last surviving elderly elderly grandson of Nebuchadnezzar was slain.
Right. So according to
So
the Medrash,
question is, who killed Belshazzar?
right? According to the Medrash, Song of Songs.
Yeah.
It was Cyrus and Darius who were actually security guards, sentries for Belshazzar. They killed him, and then which creates a natural reason why the countries both countries would unite behind them and to be the next leaders. And there's an immediate transition from Belshazzar to Darius in rule. And the very first verse of the next chapter, and Darius the Mede received the kingdom at the age of 62. Received the kingdom as if it was handed to him on a platter. So it also the terminology of that verse seems to also fit with that Medrash Song of Songs. But again, I'd like to know more history on that. But again, when we talk about ancient history, it's very, very, very difficult because of the propensity for ancient kingdoms to lie. There just wasn't the same value as in modern history to try to give an actual account of what happened.
Yeah.
Postmodern history tries to rewrite. We're talking about modern.
Weren't Cyrus and if it weren't Cyrus and Darius who killed Nebuchadnezzar, it would have been his own guards who were traitors themselves and betrayed Nebuchadnezzar, his own regular Babylonian guards who could have killed him themselves instead of the two Persian kings.
According to Josephon, that Rashi sometimes quotes, it was a eunuch of Belshazzar who killed him.
His own unit murdered him. Just two people.
Right, which makes sense. I mean, unless the palace was invaded and the invaders killed him, but it uses the terminology of assassination.
2 kings. One was Persian, one was Median.
Right, so he was killed by an assassin. What assassin could get into the palace? Only one of his own people. As we see with the ancient Romans, most of the ancient Romans, the Caesars, etc., they were all killed by someone that knew them
and hated them for whatever reason, and were angry and immeasurably pissed at all the chaos and genocide they inflicted on the Jews.
Well, yeah, let's okay, so let's
Nero.
Pardon.
What'd you say, Alan?
Caligula and Nero were both assassinated, I believe.
Yeah, many were. Even Marcus Aurelius was assassinated, even though he was great.
Pardon my word, we're just speaking beautiful, holy words of Torah.
Unfortunately, Marcus Aurelius only ruled 11 years. It would be great if he ruled 40 years, but
Yeah, but
yes.
But anyway.
Okay, so all right. So any other questions? Final questions?
Unfortunately, Marcus Aurelius only ruled 11 years.
Correct.
Who killed him?
The killer of Marcus Aurelius killed Marcus Aurelius.
Why do Roman emperors have the same name, like most of them?
Well, a lot of the times the next emperor was the murderer of the previous emperor.
No children.
Now, if they had a rule, anybody with blood in their hands couldn't be the emperor, unless they were like leading an army and they were blood in their hands that way. So that would have removed like half of the assassinations in Roman history. But their system was conducive to getting rid of somebody who was in the way of the next generation, unfortunately. So any final questions? Any final questions before we call it a session? All right, so I guess we'll pause here. Thank God we were able to teach over an hour and a half. That's pretty good.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you.
Very good, Rabbi. Thank you so much.
Very good.